Hello, Mr. Allman here, and this is your introductory Allmancast to IB Biology. Our time in class is precious. That time, it's really important for us to be very interactive, for students to be talking with students, and for you to be talking with me. And if we cluttered up too much of our time with me talking at you through lectures, then we would waste the opportunity to do a lot more of the more interesting and more helpful class activities. For that reason, I will use the Allmancast as a way for me to be able to explain key concepts to you in video form so that you can then view those at home, on your way to and from school, or as review as many times as you need. Unlike a lecture, you can control how fast and how often you watch this content. If you need to pause and rewind and watch something again, you can do so. If you need to watch something a second or third time, you can do so. If you want to speed it up and watch it more quickly, you can do so. All of the images that you see here below and for most of these videos are going to correspond to Prezi PowerPoints. Those Prezis are also available for you to look at independent of my video. So look in the comment section below the information section of the video, or you can look to Google Classroom for links to be able to find those Prezis and view them on your own. And with that, let's get started. The point of this particular video is to be able to look at the major questions that biologists study and how it is that biologists really begin to think and work to answer those questions. Science is ultimately two different things. Science is a way to think about the world. The scientific process is a way to be able to make observations, gather evidence, and use that evidence to be able to draw conclusions that explain the natural world that's around us. But over time, as scientists have accumulated knowledge through that method, we have generated a whole body of knowledge, natural laws, and theories explaining the existence of life, the Earth, and the solar system and universe and beyond. And so that body of knowledge that comes about through the scientific process is also what we refer to as science. Now, that scientific process is often summarized, particularly to elementary and middle school students, as the scientific method. This very linear approach towards science where a hypothesis is generated, evidence collected, and conclusions drawn. That process is really unrealistic and very divorced from what scientists are really doing, because very few people think in that way. More often, as observations are made, as experiments are generated and evidence is collected, there is actually a lot of convincing and collaboration that needs to go on between a scientist and his or her peers. In reality, people are often resistant to change and resistant to new ideas, and so it's not uncommon, and we'll look at stories over the next 2 years in which people with new explanations about scientific phenomenon get dumped on by their peers. And it really takes a lot of repetition and a lot of time in order for a new body of knowledge to be accepted by the scientific community. It's also important to note the difference between causation and correlation, and that gathering evidence that links two phenomenon together doesn't necessarily mean that one causes the other. Many times what scientists are looking for is correlated changes, and once that correlation or that simultaneous happening of two different processes or events, they can then use established scientific theory to be able to explain the link between those things. Now, this isn't the only way of thinking about the world. Philosophy, religion, technology, and art all provide a different perspective on how to think and interact with our world. And those things aren't separate from science, and they don't need to be completely separated in your mind. Rather, these things should be complementary to each other in generating our understanding of the world that's around us. There are two major ways that scientists think about the world, and each of these goes through different phases in which one point of view may be more or less popular than the other. The reductionist point of view takes things that are very complex. Questions like, what is life? What is the cell? What is an organism? And breaks that down into smaller smaller and smaller parts. We can look at environmental interactions and break those down into species, which are broken down into separate populations, individual organisms, the organs that are within them, the tissues, the cells, the organelles, and then ultimately down to the individual molecules that are there. So by taking something as complex as the Earth's biosphere, these people will look to understand the molecules that make up the living things within it as a way to be able to understand that bigger picture. Again, it's like taking a big puzzle, breaking it down into those little pieces and studying those pieces very closely. And that if you mentally then reconnect those pieces with each other, you'll really understand the big picture. Now, what that leaves out is the question of whether something, for example, a tree, a human, a bacteria, is that just the sum of its parts? Is a human really just about a collection of different organs and tissues within a single body? Or is there something bigger about what makes that living thing alive? Systems thinking is a separate way to be able to look at that. And in systems thinking, you look at inputs, processes, outputs, and the feedback that controls them. You're looking much more at the big picture of what's happening within that living thing. For example, you can look at a person. What is going in? Well, oxygen, food, what's happening inside. There's metabolic processes and digestion and respiration. And then you see what are the outputs. There's carbon dioxide and water vapor. And what feedback controls those processes? How are hormones and how are other environmental stimuli, how are those related back to that? And so in this case, you still do look at some of those nitty-gritty details, but you aren't ever chopping that thing up into smaller parts. You're never taking that person and dividing that person up into those individual molecules. Rather, you're trying to look and see what systems are interacting with each other within that larger whole. Now, systems are necessarily complex. The cellular systems, the organ systems, the environmental systems, these are big, complex things made up of many, many parts. And so to be able to understand them better, we build models. Models are ways to be able to try to understand something that's very complex using mental models, using mathematical models, using physical models, to be able to represent in some way, in a simpler form, what's happening on that larger scale. We'll take a look now at the different unifying themes of biology. Biology is, by definition, the study of life. And so, what are some of the themes that extend beyond all living things? These are themes that will pop up in each of our units. We don't look at them separately, but instead, in each of our units, we will highlight the importance of each of these themes at different points throughout the next 2 years. Arguably the most important theme, because of how it is that this theme impacts all areas of biology, is evolution. Evolution is change over time, and specifically in biology, we're referring to the change in species from generation to generation over the whole course of Earth's history. The Earth is really old, 4.5 billion years, and life has existed on Earth for at least 3 billion of those. So that's an incredibly long period of time over which we've seen explosions in the forms and amount of life, as well as crashes and periods of time where we've seen many things go away. Different body plans appear and disappear. And so being able to look back and trying to reconstruct this history, we use evolution as a way to be able to explain why it is that those changes occur. Natural selection is a mechanism that helps to demonstrate how it is that this is possible, how a species can change in certain characteristics over time. And this has to do with the presence of favorable traits allowing for species to reproduce and pass on those favorable traits to future generations. Second important theme is matter. So matter is the physical stuff that we're made up of. So all living things are organized into cells. All living things have a very consistent set of biomolecules, proteins, nucleic acids, carbohydrates, and fats that they're made up of. And so we can look at the different types of molecules, no matter what type of organism that we're looking at, and see some of that commonality based on the type of matter and the organization of that matter within it. This theme will be very important as we look at both cells and biochemistry. Energy is another important theme because energy is something that all living things need. They need energy on a consistent basis in order to maintain life, because energy is what drives all the processes that keep living things from dying. And so there is, again, a very high degree of consistency between organisms in how it is that they obtain and process that energy. And so this is something that will pop up, again, quite a bit in our metabolism unit, as well as in our molecular biology unit. Information is another important theme. Information is the way in which life is able to persist from generation to generation. It's how cells are able to know what to do. Cells are ultimately little factories that build proteins, and those proteins are molecules that do all of the work that's within us. DNA is the molecule that provides the information necessary for our cells to make those proteins. And that DNA, which is a molecule whose sole responsibility is to store information, is what's passed on from parent to child in all species. And so we see the presence of DNA as an important characteristic of life. Regulation is another important theme, and this can manifest itself in some different ways. One is looking at the development of living systems. So, for example, as we look at organisms progressing from a single-celled fertilized egg into a whole organism, what processes happen to regulate to ensure that that single cell divides at the correct rate and produces the correct types of tissues and organs. We can look at that on physiological level, so looking at, for example, hormones. How do hormones interact within our body to ensure that we will be able to maintain constant conditions at all times, no matter what's going on in our environment, whether it's hot or cold, whether we are active or resting. And then finally looking at the maintenance of living systems. So how is it that whole communities of organisms, how are they regulated? How is it that the numbers of predator and prey, for example, are kept consistent? Why don't the predators eat up all of the prey until there aren't any more? Again, this is that idea of regulation and maintaining life within a kind of Goldilocks condition, not too much or not too little at any given time. Communication is very important. Obviously, this will come up a lot in our neurobiology unit as we look at, on a physiological level, how it is that information is communicated from one part of the body to the other, how it is that our senses work, how it is that our brain is able to communicate to our muscles. But communication is also important in looking at things like behavior. What types of behaviors are taken on by non-humans as a way to be able to pass information from one organism to another, for defense, for sexual, for mating purposes, or any other reason that two individuals may need to communicate with each other. Finally, interactions. So looking at the interconnectedness or the relationships between individuals and between species. So we can see interactions like the mating processes and sexual reproduction, looking at the interaction within and between populations. So for example, looking at nutrient cycles, looking at the biodiversity that's present within a coral reef and seeing how each one of those species is a benefit to the other. And then obviously also looking at the interactions between communities and the ecosystem as a whole. And this becomes important as we look at how is it that humans are having an impact on our global ecosystems. So, as I said, each of these themes is something that has various importance in different parts of the course, but all of them are going to come up again and again. So be familiar and be looking for these things as we move through our different units. Our units will be organized around particular topics within biology, and we'll draw upon each of these. Thank you for listening. I welcome your questions because I certainly know that I don't always say things as clearly as I could. So please send me an email, leave me a message, or bring it up in class. Thank you for watching.